Show. Comedy on Power Talk. Please go to our website, powertalk.live. Download our free app and stream all of our live local programming, including Solomon on Blast, The Jim Parisi Show, and yours truly, The Jake Feinberg Show. Can't thank you enough for making us part of your day today. And without further ado, I want to bring back a friend of the program, a guy who thinks he doesn't have any more to talk about, but I certainly have more questions. Rick Marotta, welcome to The Jake Feinberg Show.
Hi, Jake.
Good to hear you, my man.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I mean, you're a little bit distant, but that's fine. You're on speed. I'll let you know if it's, if it worsens, but you sound good.
Okay, this should be better.
Yeah, that sounds good. I want to just start with an audio clip. It's Name That Voice, but I'm more interested in you really paying attention to the content. If you know who it is, that's great too, but I want you to focus on what he's talking about, and then we'll come back and break it down.
Okay.
Anymore like it used to be. We would say 4 on the floor means that you play 4/4 time with the bass drum. And nowadays, because of Tony Williams and Elvin Jones and those drummers, Roy Haynes, those drummers influenced other drummers to leave the foot out. Max Roach, he left it out too. But Kenny Clark was one of the original drummers that used to have the foot sound. And Art Blakey had it too. And you could hear the difference. Billy Joe had it as well. You could hear the difference, and then when they played when they played ensemble stuff, the foot would always be gone because the bass player has to have that. He's standing right next to you, so if he can't hear your foot doing 4 beats to the measure the same as he's doing, then you can't lock in on a rhythm to make a nice cushion for the soloist or the composition or whatever it is you're playing. But you have to have, and the bass players don't want you to play it too loud because it makes the bass sound, the notes sound real short, so you have to be able to feather it, they call it, feather the bass drum. All the old-time drummers used to do it. One person who did it, but very loud, was Buddy Rich. He was loud, but he would do it through everything.
Right.
And Louis Bellson used to do it too, but not as loud as Buddy Rich. Buddy Rich sounded like a truck coming down the street, but his foot was as fast as his hands, and it was as loud as his hands, so he played through the band arrangements. Once he started playing, you boom, 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 you heard that through the whole song. But then,
all right, he just, the word was cut off right at the beginning. He said the foot is not used the way it once was, and I would like you to talk about feathering the bass drum, your concept of feathering the bass drum, and if you feel like it's kind of one of those things that there should be an emphasis on it, because I don't know. I listened to cats today. Obviously, we live in an amplified world. It's not acoustic. When you were coming up, or maybe you had a PA mic blasting stuff out in the Apollo, but can you talk about how you learned to feather the bass drum, and if you feel the foot is not used in the same way that it was back when you were coming up?
Well, first of all, I'm not even sure I know what you mean by feathering the bass drum.
Not where it's not a pulsating, bam, 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 but yet there's a nuance to it, and there's a timbre to it, so that it's not.
Well, first of all, I don't know who
I'm sorry. That was Tootie Heath. I'm sorry. That was Tootie Heath. So I didn't make that clear. But what I was really talking about was the ability for the bass to be heard, and the bass drum being feathered and not used as sort of a pulsating, bam, 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 bam kind of thing.
Well, I mean, he was talking about every drummer that he talked about got their names before, other than Tony Williams, before I was even playing the drums. So he was mostly talking about jazz drummers and jazz feeling. And when he was talking about that quarter note thing, I think he was just talking about the old walking bass quarter note thing where guys used to play. I'm just trying to interpret what I just heard and what you're asking me, where they used to play just straight on quarter notes so that they're playing with the bass player, and then on top, the snare drum and the hi-hat and the cymbals, not counting things they might be playing on the toms, of course. They would be just playing that sort of, that dotted spang-a-lang bebop kind of ride, or even pre-bebop kind of ride. You're talking about, sounds like to me, you might be talking about apples and oranges, because that changed when we were playing funk. Guys didn't play quarter notes on the bass drum that I ever heard. When I first started hearing bands like the Orchids and Giant and those early bands that I grew up, that I knew about when I grew up in my hometown, my area there, they were based off of like James Brown and Joe Tex and Sam Dave and Otis Redding. That kind of stuff was the teeth cutting for me and the guys that I knew at that time. Excuse me. There were no quarter note feels, I don't think, on the bass drum. So the relevance to me is not. It doesn't really.
Right. No,
I don't quite understand.
Yeah. Well, I came in. This is sort of more like a list, like a big ear, like my ears when I listen to, not even jazz, but guys where maybe you were playing the top of the kit. Where you learned how to play the top of the kit, and there was not an emphasis so much on the bottom of the kit. Right. There were cats were saying, you play a jazz top with a rock bottom. I mean, I have a clip coming up later where it was like in that band with Neville after Riverboat, you guys were playing jazz, and then the club owner said, well, we're going to have a change in format. We want you to play soul music now. I'm just trying to get that delineation between, I guess all I'm saying is when I hear fusion music, when I hear drummers today, you talked about it last time where you're like, you think that it's actually a computer and it's actually somebody who's been, comping computer beats, but it's a human being. And when I just hear a lot of mush in the bottom end now, I don't hear a lot of separation between the bass and the drums. And that's
yeah.
And
I hear what you're saying.
I don't know. I mean, I didn't mean
that's a whole different thing.
So break that down.
Well, I don't know really how to break that down, Jake. I'll be honest with you, because I mean, if I'm going to break it down the way that I would recognize what you're talking about, it would be, yes. Now I understand, because when I listen to some hip hop or actually a lot of real pop stuff, there's, instead of a real bass drum being played, there's this sort of synthesized approximation of a bass drum, and it's not a syncopated thing. It's a very sort of, and if it is syncopated, it's very, very, very wide open. By the way, I don't have anything against it. I think it sounds great on a lot of pop things, but you're talking about that kind of music. It's not. It's kind of just an evolution of what really up and comers now are putting together from what they recognize as funk music from 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and hip hop music evolution in the 80s, 90s, and what's contemporary. I mean, if you look at that kind of a flow, information flow, sonically, I think that's what you might be talking about. I don't know that it's a playing situation, because I watch guys that sit down and play in bands that are pop bands and hip hop bands, and I think there are some really good players, and they're approximating what the record is, but they're playing live, I see more live drums and live performances, and I only see these live performances really on TV shows or things like that, where they have something like Jay-Z playing. Although Jay-Z the other day was playing two tracks,
right?
Something I saw,
right.
But when you see guys playing drums, I see guys playing drums, funky knuckle drums, behind guys like Justin Timberlake or geez, I don't even know how to name Halsey, people like that. They're very, they're pop bands. Bruno Mars is a funk band. I mean, that's a retro. Everything about that band is retro, and yet you can listen and you'll hear very advanced technological stuff in their music anyway. But when they play live, they look, you watch them on the Super Bowl and places like that, it looks like, it's a reincarnation of James Brown meets Otis Redding meets Sam and Dave, whatever it is, and it's really, really good, and it's very well done. When you're talking about production of recordings, record production, it's a whole different ball game. I understand that guys get in and they play. They have, there's a lot of wide open sounds in the bass and the bass drum. Usually pretty sparse. I don't hear a whole lot of very busy stuff because you can't get away with it. It just turns into mud. But I don't know if that's what you're asking me, but
there's no really right or wrong questions. Like, I guess part of it is also what you talked about. I mean, yeah, they might be demonstrating prodigious, styles and pulling that off well, but you said, the mantra for you guys was really, you wanted to have your own sound. You wanted to be able to tell somebody coming a mile away, whether Pretty Purdy,
yeah.
Keltner, Marotta.
Yeah. Oh,
okay.
Yeah.
But that's
yeah.
why can't you?
Different...
Yeah, but why can't? Okay, so maybe that is. I'm not a musician, so I mean, I guess part of it is that when I listen to instrumental music, especially from the time that you were really coming up, or when you started to pick up the drum kit, you're right. It is part of it. I don't know. Part of it had to do with the recording techniques and the miking techniques. It just seemed to me, oh yeah, you can tell who that is by the way that they were using.
Yes, there were a lot of signatures back then. I can't tell who anybody is now.
Now, why is that?
That I understand, but that was because there were a lot of guys inventing. There were a lot of guys inventing ways, their own sound, inventing their own approach to the music. Bernard Purdy is a perfect example. Bernard Purdy established his own version of rhythm and blues, putting together what he had heard other guys do, playing R&B and funk, and with his contemporaries, and what he knew about what I would think would be ska music. I always thought that was how Bernard put his stuff together.
Interesting.
And I think he even says that. He even talks about that in the interviews that he does, that those were the influences he had. But he had a signature at that time that was, you could spot him 4 bars in. You didn't even have to go 4 bars. Sometimes you could listen to a fill into the downbeat of the first bar of the song, and you knew it was Bernard Purdy. Jim Keltner had a very stylized signature sound of his own when he played on certain things. Like, I always talk about him playing with Ry Cooder and those kind of light funk things. Really interesting.
What was he doing? You said there were a couple of very subtle things that made it, you could tell it was James Lee Keltner right away.
Jim had a way of what you mentioned earlier, playing the top of the kit and the bottom of the kit. Jim had a way of integrating the top of the kit and the bottom of the kit in a unique feel kind of way. Like, sometimes he would play stuff on his bass drum against what he'd be playing on the hi-hat and the snare drum that felt like it was almost felt like it would be 2 different songs.
Right.
And yet it was a combination of his feeling inside, sort of inside 8th notes, inside 16th notes, inside a dot on a 16th note, against a straight eighth note on top. I mean, that's just something that I don't specifically break down. I always looked at it as feel. I always listen to it and go, that feels special. Bernard feels special. There were other guys. God, I can't remember all the names of the guys.
What about cats like that were in your face, like Ed Shaughnessy and those cats? I mean, you knew those cats. I mean, Ed was like he was the Dax Severinsen guy, or Donald McDonald. I mean, to me, when you told the story, oh no, I'm sorry, Charles Neville, and I mean, he talked about these cats in New Orleans. They weren't schooled, but they were playing the trap set with their hands. With their hands, they were. That's what I'm saying. Is like to me. There's some correlation that I have, and I am digging for it, and I don't expect you to have any answers for it. But it's this anonymity in style, in the stylizing of why there was this incentive and this onus and this absolute, total apocalyptic drive towards individualism amongst you guys. Garibaldi was like, I'm going to cut my wrists if somebody came up and told me I sound like Gaylord Birch. Nobody wanted to sound the same. And now it's like, yeah, they're doing it and they're cooking this groove between Otis Redding and James Brown. But I mean, also I just don't know why I can't pick anybody out anymore. I don't know. And it's not even like I listen to a huge bag.
Well, listen, I think that there are some, I don't know their names, honestly, because they're kind of anonymous unless you're in that clique or that crew that they play in, that little group of people that do concerts together. And I don't know all of their names, but they play really, really well. But no offense to any of them. They sound very similar, same fills. Some of them are incredible fills, really, really great fills and great grooves. But when I look at them, sometimes I have to say that I'll look at a drummer, I'll listen to a drummer, I'll look at him, and I'll go, they not only sound alike, they look alike, which to me means they all know each other, they all know each other's work, and they kind of try to copy each other, and it goes around in this little circle. And I am not saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm not saying it's bad in any way. We probably did the same. I was absolutely the same way in a certain way, because I did someone was talking to me about reading music the other day. I was doing an interview about something, and somebody was talking about reading and doing sessions. It was mostly about that. And so I said, well, forgetting reading, because my brother Jerry used to say to me all the time, why would anybody want to hire you or me and have us play exactly what they write? Because we have our own personalities in playing, and he's correct. But when I was talking about working with Edgar Winter, and Edgar, I remember Edgar one time we were doing a track on one of his records. I don't remember what it was. And I was in his band also. We were doing, I was in White Trash band. It was going back and forth between me and Bobby Ramirez at that time. And Bobby was the real drummer. But once they put the band with Bobby Ramirez and Jerry LaCroix and John Smith together, I would play with Jerry and John. And then sometimes when Bobby would injure himself because he was such a monster of a player. He was an unbelievable player, but he played really hard, and he was literally, it was like he'd go on injured reserve because he was such a hard player.
Is it back issues or pulled muscles and things like that?
I remember once he played so hard that he had a callus that was so big on his thumb that it cut the nerve off on his thumb, so he couldn't feel his thumb, so he couldn't hold the drumstick. They would fly out of his hands.
That's incredible. I mean, that's the callus. I mean, I was watching the baseball game last night, and I'm watching the Cubs pitcher Kyle Hendricks blow on the blisters on his fingers.
Blowing his fingers?
Yeah, blowing his fingers. I'm like, that's Marotta. Someone used to say that was the getting over those blisters as a guitar player or whatever. I mean, that's amazing. He busted it. He ruptured a nerve in his finger.
Bobby?
Bobby, yeah.
Yeah. Oh. He blocked the nerve from what happened was the callus got so big, it pressed against the nerve, and he lost feeling in his thumb. So he had surgery, and they cut the callus, they pushed it away, and they took the nerve. I remember the surgery, and they moved the nerve to the side, so when he grew that callus again, it wouldn't push against that particular nerve. They somehow bypassed it. And one day I was, so I had to do, I don't know how long I did on that particular tour, but it was Johnny and Edgar, and I remember that that we did a show, and I think it was in Long Island, and Bobby was standing on the side of the stage with this big cast-like thing on his thumb, and I'm doing the gig, and the gig was just on fire. I guess we were really crazy, on fire, and that was really exhausting gig for me. And we were playing really hard, really loud band. We did it. We got off stage, and there was encore. We did this first encore. Then we come out, we do like the second encore, and Bobby is going so crazy. He says, "Rick, I gotta play. And I said, "Okay, here." He gave him the sticks. He went out. He played the shit out of it, and he walks off stage with a big smile on his face. The bandages on his finger had come off, and there was blood all over his hand. What did you do? All the stitches popped out. Everything popped out. He had to go back into the doctor and all that stuff. But he was so much of a lover of music and such a hard player, he couldn't control himself. So, but that was a digression, because the point of the story
exactly. Yeah, go ahead.
I remember when Edgar, we were doing some songs for the tour and for the record, and Edgar had written this song, and he also had a drum part in mind that he played for me. It was a very tricky, and when I say left-handed, I don't mean it was a left-handed part. I mean, it was, when I say left-handed, it means like it's a very quirky, not walking down the center of the, you're not walking the center line. It was a very weird drum part, really funky, not conventional at all. And I watched him, and the way he played it, he had this body language that he played. When I learned the part, which I had to learn kind of verbatim because it was so great, I said, "All right, Edgar, show me that part. I want to learn it." It wasn't easy, and when I learned it, not only did I play the part as much like him as I could, I tried to look, because he looked very awkward and very uncomfortable playing it. I tried to look like him because I wanted to sound like that so much that I figured, well, if I look like the guy playing the part, I'm going to probably sound more like the guy. That gets back to what I'm telling you about all these guys I listen to that are playing on these things that I hear, like these great bands, these great songs. When I see them live, they look like the same guy. Sometimes I wonder if it's the same guy. They play fills, exactly. They play the fills very much the same. They set their drums up very much the same, very sort of flat tom-toms on top, kind of lower than I would, kind of different, just flatter tom-toms. And point being, I think that's why a lot of guys play similarly. They hear each other. It's a very tight brotherhood and community. You know how drummers are, and they admire each other, and it's a very sincere form of flattery. So somebody who started playing like that has influenced a lot of contemporary drummers right now who are really good, who have amazing amounts of chops, play very funky, play interesting fills, but they sound similar. Back in the old days, we were getting bits and pieces from everybody. If you were going to steal something, you didn't steal one guy's style. You got Bernard Purdy, who's playing his particular thing, and he's got ska influence and island Caribbean influence to funk. And then you've got Jim Keltner, who I don't even know. And I'm looking at a picture right now. I'm in my studio. I'm looking at a picture of me and Jim Keltner that was taken in my studio, and we're doing some sort of record where he was playing drums on it, and we're using my studio for it, and I did a track or two, and he did a bunch of tracks on it. And I'm thinking, wherever Jim got his influence from, who he watched when he was really young, where was he out of? Oklahoma?
Because I asked him this. It was out of Tulsa, and he said he didn't. He said those there were two cats, and my battery on my phone died, but there were two guys from Tulsa that really that were already in L.A. that he was heavily influenced by at that point. But he wouldn't necessarily say it was a Tulsa feel. It was Carl Radel, Leon Russell, and these two. And I wish I could bring up their names right now. But here's the question. The clique is very small now. I mean, you mentioned to me last time, you said a lot of these bands, maybe, Usher or, Bruno Mars or whoever it is, it's the same rhythm sections. Is that, I mean, it's compared, the supply, the amount of musicians is smaller. So they don't have as a big a brotherhood. I mean, let me ask you a question. When was can you point to a time when a younger cat, when, like with Mac and you, or when Charlie Neville said your shuffle sounds great, but it would sound even better if you did this, where you were not only open to the idea, but then you started doing it, and all the cats were like, how does it feel so good? Does that still exist in today's paradigm, or are you sort of somebody who is verbally giving advice? I mean, when was the last time you actually went up to someone and said, listen, sounds great, try this, though, and they were open to it?
I think that happens a lot more than you would think. I mean, mostly when people ask me for advice, I don't give lessons or any of that stuff. And advice, I think, is the best advice you could give anybody is to not give anybody advice. but I think that I remember guys. I was just hungry because I never studied. I was hungry for any kind of information or advice. I remember Spinoza, every time we did a gig, I mean, I was in a band with him. We were just we're just kids. And when I say kids, I mean 19, 20. He knew more about music. He had more knowledge about music in his pinky than I had in my whole body. So every time he mentioned something, it was a lesson for me. And we were always talking about analyzing why this sounded great, why that sounded great. And I remember us having a conversation one time about this is germane to what you're talking about, I think. We were talking about, there was a bass player, when I grew up, we're talking about Bernard Purdie. Let's just go there.
Right.
That group of guys.
Right.
So I ended up being the other drummer that played with that group of guys more often than anybody until Steve Gadd came around, and then Steve Jordan. So one of the guys that played bass with those guys was, of course, Chuck Rainey.
Absolutely.
Who's on, I think he played Don't Take Me Alive. I think Chuck was on that.
You're on that. I know that you're playing drums on that. It's always mercurial. Yeah, go ahead.
And Larry Carlton is on that one. Sure. And I pretty much think it was also Chuck. Chuck and I were working a lot together. Well, the other bass player that was in that crew is a guy that you probably know, but a lot of people may not know, is a guy named Jerry Jamot.
Interviewed him.
Jerry Jamot.
Absolutely.
And Jerry used to play, he's lefty. And I remember one of the conversations we had, like Dave and I were talking about, when they did Memphis Soul Stew, the King Curtis record, and Aretha Live record, those two very, very famous 70s, 60s records of Live at the Fillmore or something that were just unbelievable. Bernard Purdie, Kid Cornell Dupree, those guys. I think Jerry Jamot was the bass player.
He was.
And Memphis Soul Stew and all those things. And I remember us having a conversation about what made him sound so great. Now, I toured with Jerry. I played on a lot of records with Jerry, and I toured with him with Roberta Flack. But it was basically because he approached the instrument, from a different direction. He was playing it lefty. He played it upside down and backwards, and his way of playing was upside down and backwards, and it sounded unbelievably good.
Wow.
That's the kind of analysis that we would make. I remember Charles, you were talking about Charles Neville. Charlie said to me, I remember him telling me about practice. This is the kind of information I would get that I never forgot. This is the information I give to somebody. I told somebody this the other day who was talking to me about on a totally different instrument, talking about playing parts and these things that they were doing. And I said, well, what Charles told me was he would play, you know what kind of a horn player, an alto player he is. He's just unbelievable.
Unreal.
He would practice. When he would practice, he would take a part. And he told me about this groove stuff. Play it from left to right. Play it from right to left. Then play it from the inside out, going both ways. I mean, that to me was so abstract at the time, but it made so much amazing sense to me. And I had so much respect for Charles as a player that I started practicing that way. I don't know that people approach things like that anymore. I'm trying to answer your question in as civil a way as I can. I just don't know.
Yeah, there are no wrong or right answers. This is about enlightenment, because I just wonder if my generation, younger generations, are open to the actual. Like, it's one thing to give advice, and then there's another thing for, Mac or Charles to sit down and actually demonstrate it. The mentors that Neville had, Sonny Stitt, these were like profound lessons, and they were delivered in maybe a handful of words. And then basically you had to, you had to know how to play in before you could play out. And then the other thing about Stitt was that he said the whole horn, to Neville, the whole horn is based on the scales. It's all based on the scales, and it becomes like a cube, like a Rubik's Cube. And you'd go deeper and deeper and deeper into that, and eventually you'd be able to play every song in every key. And I just don't know if
you go deeper and deeper and deeper into that, and you come out John Coltrane. That's what I did.
Well, that's right. And that's right. And
then you go deeper into that, and you come out Michael Brecker. I remember. Right. I know exactly what you're saying. That rings true. That's really, really true. The thing about, you're saying Sonny Stitt said you had to know how to play in to play out?
Actually, who said that? Tootie told me that.
Charles?
No, Tootie said that. Ornette said that.
Ornette Coleman?
Yeah, Ornette Coleman said you got to learn to play in before you can play out. But the idea was that Charles they were listening to Sonny Stitt records because him and Train, before Train got into the modal thing, they were kind of peers. And so he was they were peers, and he was listening to what Stitt was doing. And so for a while he would copy those solos. But then when he'd get on the bandstand, after that stuff was finished, he'd have no more vocabulary to work from. So he had to go back and stretch it out even more. So Stitt was just saying go deeper, but don't overcomplicate it. Just go within the rudiments and stretch because it becomes this cube. And so ultimately it helped people's vocabulary. And I guess what the larger point is, whether it's a drummer, horn player, whatever, it allowed them to create their own voice, their own sound, and they had that ability to stretch out. But
did you did an interview with Spinoza?
Yeah, he's hiding from me. I'm looking to do part 2 with that cat because he was what a brilliant cat that guy was, man. But
because this is the kind of conversation you should have with him.
No, I'm having a ball with you. No, listen. I want to put this.
He can really, but this is the kind of conversation I have with him.
No, we did one like this. When
I talk to him about this stuff, he's like a music, as much of a field player. I know David and love David as a field player. As much of a field player as he is, he's also a self-proclaimed. He's a music scientist. He loves to study the science of music. He really it's a hobby of his almost. Like he really will sit. He'll talk about it for hours and hours. He'll analyze it. He doesn't make a difference when he gets on the bandstand and he plays his feel shit. It just feels. To me, it's perfect. I understand David's feel like it's like you're in. It would be like you were in a parade and you're marching next to a guy. You're in step with the guy. I don't have to look. I know the guy is in step with me. Everyone's in step. It's the way David plays. But he can think, excuse me, and analyze so far out of the box as you're talking about that it becomes a box. He could think so far out of the box that it amazes me sometimes, and I get it, but it's like it's beyond my scope.
Well, but you're doing just
For
you're
example,
doing yeah. I know. I want to just. I've been doing a lot of woodshedding since I talked to you last time, and one of the things I was able to get to this cat, and I want you to listen to this story that he tells, and because Marotta, there's a lot of history with Rick Marotta. We know that he was very close to a lot of the cats from New Orleans, so. This kind of blew my mind. I want you to take a listen to this, and we'll come back.
Well, I don't know where he had learned the one that he knew. But let me tell you about a band that Rick was in with me. Joe Tex had a band, and in that band was some friends of mine from New Orleans, James Booker, Fred Kemp, and Leo, the bass player. And they all left Joe Tex's band in New York when I was living there. So we put together a band and had a gig on, I think it was 124th and 7th Avenue at some club. And so we needed a drummer, and I had played with Rick in the Riverboat Soul Band and some other things. So I called him, and he got to play with those cats, with James Booker, Fred Kemp. And the guitar player we got was Phineas Newburn's brother.
Wow. Whoa. You know who that is?
That's Charlie.
That's Charlie. Now, James Booker, you played with Booker. It's unbelievable. I mean,
I don't even remember half of this stuff. I remember Fred. Because
Fred Kemp, he was very close with. No, you have to. I'm trying to bring back. So it was Phineas Newborn. The point is, this was after Riverboat Soul, and you were brought into this band with Calvin Newborn.
Yeah.
And then James Booker. I mean, you were playing with the original, with some of the. I mean, you were just totally steeped into that. But Charles went on to say that the club owner, on a dime, you guys were playing jazz at first, and then he said, "We're having a music change. We're going to soul." And you just changed.
I'm wondering why Charles would call me to play jazz, because he used to say to me, he's the guy that really, it was really funny. I would play a shuffle, more of a jazz-like shuffle. And I told you in the other time we had spoken that Charles had said to me, he's the one that sat down and played me the shuffle feel, and the way he wanted it to feel. And it was very bottom heavy. Top was playing just a shuffle. Everything played a shuffle. Everything played a shuffle. I mean, and it just felt like a freight train when Charlie did it. So when I would play, I would probably be a little bit more heavy-handed than Charlie would want, because he was a very delicate. He could play very delicate alto parts. I remember he used to do Ode to Billy Joe as an instrumental. We used to do it in the band, and I remember it was a showstopper purely because of him. Wow. Now, it was just his tone, his time, the texture of his sound, and his approach to melody and time were impeccable. I mean, impeccable. And I remember every time we did Ode to Billy Joe, I couldn't wait for us to do that simple song, because it was just Charlie playing Charles Neville. He was being himself. I don't remember, honestly,
124th and 7th, 124th and 7th Avenue. I don't know what he couldn't remember the.
Well,
club.
He lived at 125th, and he lived at 120 something in Morningside, and I remember spending time up there, where I even stayed over one or two nights when he was living in this apartment and sharing it with another family. He and his wife, at the time, Charles' wife, and this other family were sharing the apartment, and I had driven up there. I had to go do something, bring Charlie up there or something, and he said, "Oh, you can't go home, man. You can't walk out on the streets here tonight. You're staying here.
You stay right here."
So I remember that that I stayed there a couple of times, but I don't totally remember that gig. I do remember another gig with that same band that we did in Amerenik, New York, where I grew up next door was Harrison, where my family was from. And I remember we went there and my mother fed the whole band. And then we went to Mamaroneck and did this gig. And then we were doing, I don't know how many nights we were doing there. It was a club, but it was a very, very kind of popular place. And the club owner knew me, and that's how we got the gig from some other bands I was in with Spinoza. Very nice guy, but, you know, it was typical New York kind of cabaret kind of stuff. You were in a band, dance, people were dancing, and it was that band, and it was all funk, and we were playing. It was great stuff, and they were all funky, knuckle New Orleans players, so it was on fire. And I remember playing one night, and in the middle of the set, the owner came up to me. I was sitting at the drums, and he came up to me in the middle of the set, and in my ear, he said, "Rick, could you guys take a break for a minute? We got a little bit of a problem." And so I said, "Oh, sure." So I said to the guys, we got to take a break right now. Didn't know what was going on. I said, "What's the matter?" He says, "A guy just got shot outside." So when I played at that time, I would set my drums up so that my back was against the wall. And I would sometimes between songs, because we would do 40 on, 20 off. That was our set at the time. It was a 40 minutes on, 20 minutes off, 40-20. That's the way we worked, and we do 6 sets a night. And that was all over the place. That was at the Headliner in New York. That was at the Wagon Wheel. That was at the Peppermint Lounge. That's what you played at those gigs. So we were doing the same in all these gigs we did. So, and I would lay my back against the wall. So I said, "A guy got shot." He goes, "Yeah, he was just here. The guy was just in the club." And he goes, "Let's go see." So we walked outside. The cops were all outside, and it turns out the guy walked out the door, got into a gunfight right outside the door. He had been a drug dealer or something. I remember he was standing right in front of the band. He came up to us and said goodnight. He was wearing a paisley jacket at the time. I'll never forget it. Young guy, blonde guy. He walked outside, and there were guys waiting for him in a car. It was a hit. And he got into a gunfight with them, and he ran into the alley where we were, right between the house and his club. And he got shot within, I'd say, 3 feet of me, and he was killed. And bullets probably missed me by a foot. And they went into the house next door as well. And then the car drove off. But that's my memory of working with that band.
Wait, Booker was in that band too.
Booker playing what?
Piano. James Booker. He had a patch on his eye.
James Booker, and then there was the guitar player. I remember.
Well, he said there was a guy named Leo on bass. I mean, again, there's a lot of. All I'm saying is, you were playing jazz at first. The club owner was like, "Listen, we want more."
Yeah, well, that's a different gig. That was a
right.
Gig.
This I mean, I can't.
Gig.
First of all, I'm a Stony Brook cat. Long Island, full of mafia. Was it a mafia hit or a drug hit or something? I mean, that's insane.
Yeah, it was definitely. It was a mob hit. For absolute sure. It had all the earmarks of a mob hit. He owed money to somebody. And, you know, at that time you didn't kill anybody that owed you money, you just roughed them up. But apparently he was really it was a very sad thing. I mean, it was really not fucking it was not something that
it wasn't cool. It wasn't cool. Up. Yeah, it wasn't cool at all.
No. Oh God, no. I mean, the guy was from where I was, he couldn't have been more than 3 feet from me from where I was sitting in the building. He was leaned against that wall, laid on the ground dead. I mean, that was not good. But I remember that, and I remember playing funk, and I remember people dancing at that gig. Jake, I don't remember all the gigs I did back then. I do remember being intimidated in that band because they had all come up from New Orleans. They had all been friends of Charles's from New Orleans, and that I remember him telling me they were part of a. If you talk to him again, I think he told me the guitar player, a couple of the guys were in a band that was well known in New Orleans called the Pouzant Brothers, and I remember Fred, and I don't remember all of the guys. We didn't play for that long. You know, it was at that time. It was, you know, I was getting ready to I was heading out. I was just about, I think, to join Brethren. I think I was just before I started to go play with Brethren. So I don't know what happened then. And then you know, Charles was in and out of town at the time. I believe he moved back. Did he move back to New Orleans?
Well, eventually, actually, his brothers were on the run. The Pouzant brothers remain a mystery. He was somewhat tight-lipped about them, although I talk to Charles all the time, so I'll ask him. But I mean, I just want to nail down the chronology here because it's like it's that kind of humanity and community that I love so much on the and why I do my show. You brought up Jerry LaCroix before,
right?
Did you ever? I mean, when I interviewed David Clayton Thomas, he actually got a gig from John Lee Hooker up in Canada, came down. But were you part of that sort of flying circus? Did you get a chance to play? When was the first time you played with Cooch?
Much later.
Much later.
First time I played with Cooch was first time I played with Danny was when I was playing with Linda Ronstadt. So that's in the 70s.
So you, as far as James Taylor and that sort of, because when you were with Brethren, you said
when I first played with James, which was 1973, 74, that area, that band that Cooch was in was not part of that band I was in. That band that I was in, that was the Walking Man album and Walking Man tour. That was Dave Spinoza produced that record.
That's right.
And that band was James was I think it was Hugh McCracken, me, Dave Spinoza. Shit, was it Kenny Asher playing piano? I can't remember.
I'm looking. I got Kenny Asher. I got the Brecker brothers.
Was it Andy Muson playing?
Howard. We got Ralph McDonald, and then a whole bunch of luminary cats. All the McCartneys, Marotta, McCracken, Gene Orloff, Barry Rogers, Alan Rubin, Spinoza.
Yeah, those guys were that's the horn section for like Rock and Roll is Music and for You're the One and stuff like that, which I don't think You're the One made the record. But no, I meant the band that went on the road after that. But that was the same band that went on the road. I just can't remember. Who's the bass player on that record? Was it?
You're not going to believe this. It was Paul McCartney, it says.
Paul?
Paul
because I know we sang with Paul.
Oh, Andy Muson.
Muson.
Who was
Andy Muson? Yeah.
He was the live tour bass player.
Yeah, he came on the road with us as well. Yeah.
Wow. So, and then it also says that you sang on that. Is that true? You sang on that? Wow.
Yeah, I sang some of the stuff on Rock and Roll and Music is Music. I think it was me and Paul McCartney and Linda McCartney, James and David, I think, sang background on that. And I think Paul and I shared a low part. I think that was it.
That's what I wanted to ask about is this idea. So many people now go to concerts, with pop music or whatever, that you have Journey or Tower of Power or Steve Miller Band. And it could be your generation or more modern music, but cats go because, well, I think that they really want to hear exactly what's played on the record. And I wanted to know from you, you were with Roberta Flack and obviously went on with the road with James Taylor and a ton of, you did the couple of Frampton gigs, but a lot of live stuff. Who was the artist that stretched out the most from their actual, what was cut on the album as opposed to what was actually played live?
Gee, I don't remember anybody really stretching.
Nobody's. So that was the thing. What was can you talk about your thought? You were so, and I know that you probably cringe a little bit because of my transcription, because I know you were being highly complimentary of that Miles Bitches Brew Band, even though it was frenetic and it was rats chasing each other and it was something.
Yeah, when I read what you wrote about it, and then the people's response to that was completely out of context, which is the reason why I don't like to do interviews where things are taken out of context, because I didn't mean it in any derogatory way at all. And then, then you get into the thing where it's, my opinion is I don't like long solos. Well, other guys want to sit and listen to really long solos. I don't like drum solos. Other guys love drum solos. It's all a matter of taste. There's no accounting for it. I don't judge other people's taste. It's that I don't want to go to that particular show.
No. And first of all, I want to be clear. Absolutely. People freak out about this stuff. It's your opinion, and you were being complimentary of the band. It's just it taught you that that's exactly what you didn't want to do. But I
didn't want to do that. As much as I love, you got to remember, we're listening to Chick Corea, we're listening to Miles Davis, you're listening to, and Bitches Brew Band was, Harvey Brooks was playing electric bass, and was it Mike Moore playing stand-up bass?
Mike Moore playing stand-up, yeah.
And Ayrto and Jack DeJohnette. Come on, man, please. How are you going to critique these guys? And Keith Jarrett. I mean, and that was the band. They were unbelievable. I just didn't like the fact that things went, some of the grooves were so ferocious. They were amazing. But then, the old conversation I had with you, and I don't want to get into it again, was about my not liking long solos. And I liked that poor Danny Korchmar. Cooch, I saw in one of the things that you wrote, he had agreed with me, and I'm sure he took a rash or a shit because of it too. But I mean, it's just my opinion.
Well, my point is that, but see, okay, so yeah, I mean, if you're taking shit for it, my apologies. It's like there's also this idea of saying just because
actually it wasn't as bad. The thing I felt really the worst about was, there were just some guys who I really like who it may have offended, like Vince Wilburn. But when I talked to Vince about it, I kind of called Vince and I said, Vince, really, I hope you don't think that I was being derogatory towards Miles, who's his uncle, in any way. He said, no, man, it's all good. It's all good. He goes, oh, no. And, that's what I was worried about. I didn't want to offend somebody like Vince, who's a friend of mine. And he's a very nice guy, and he's a very talented guy. I didn't want to.
Absolutely, no. I also want, and I want you to also understand. At 39, as a journalist, I don't want for somebody like Rick Marotta to be honest. Okay, you're honest about the fact that this is what you saw, this is how you felt about it, and this is how you channeled your career. It's not a uniform thing. Okay, it was not. You don't have to sit at the altar and worship this stuff. It's the honesty part of it. And you brought up Corch.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to let you know that. Let's just check it out. You brought it up, and not only was Cooch talking about it, he was gleeful to talk about it. So I just want you to take a listen. Listen to this.
Well, I couldn't possibly agree more with the great Ricky Marotta.
Yeah, good. There we go. Okay, see, that's why I brought it up to you, because when so you riff on that. Go ahead.
Well, it's just he is exactly right. Exactly right. That is the essence of boring horseshit. Get in and out. We're about the groove. Ricky's about it, and we are too. We're about the groove and getting people to tap their feet and shake their ass. Forget, none of us are John Coltrane,
Right.
And not the best of us. And nobody wants to hear 20-minute solos, and I have no intention of the section going out there and playing one tune for 20 minutes. Out of the question. We're going to get grooves going. It's going to be more of a groove-oriented thing than a look-at-me solo kind of thing. Everyone does it. Forget it. I'm not interested in doing that. This is one of the things about when the section first was playing back in the 70s. We were under the thrall of Weather Report and especially Mahavishnu Orchestra. And I never felt comfortable. I don't want to go out there and try to compete with first of all, there's no way in the world I could ever, compete with John McLaughlin or DiMeola or any of those great musicians from that era. That's not what I do. I came up playing, my influences were, as I've told you before, the guys like Steve Cropper, Curtis Mayfield, Cornell Dupree, David T. Walker here in L.A. Guys, R&B players who played great riffs and great songs and great grooves. And that's what I'm about. That is my comfort zone. So,
well, there you go. He agreed with Ricky Marotta completely. And I think that all I'm saying is that to square this circle.
Well, it might be, not to interrupt you, it might be that we have the same influences. Like when he's talking about Steve Cropper and those guys, those are the same influences that I had. I mean, we're not guys that grew up listening to, my influences were not the ones that went on and on and on. Like Mahavishnu Orchestra, I have seen them play several times, and I had the same feeling that Danny had. They were unbelievable. I mean, and I remember the keyboard player, Larry,
Was it Jan Hammer? Oh, Larry Young.
Larry Young?
Well, he was in Tony Williams' band. Are you talking about Jan Hammer?
Yeah. Larry Young. Well, Jan, I had done some work with Jan as well, but no, I had actually hung out with Larry. It was so weird. We went to see them, Tony.
It was the emergency
Tony Williams
band.
Lifetime band.
Right.
But I think John McLaughlin was playing that. Yeah,
absolutely,
John
absolutely.
And Larry Young.
Yep.
And it was, and we sat, and I remember hanging out with Larry Young afterwards because for some reason he knew who I was, and I didn't really know him, but he that music was so hard for me because it was so aggressive and so, it was like what Cooch was talking about. But I remember hanging out with Larry Young. He could not have been a nicer, sweeter,
I know,
soft-spoken, humble guy. And he's on stage in what looked like he was on stage playing this really intense, you got to go deep for this stuff, music. And you talk to him afterwards, and it was just like talking to Bambi. He was such a sweetheart. And but I guess one didn't carry over. There's many instances of that.
It's the same. McLaughlin too. McLaughlin is, to the fire that was coming out of them. I'm with you, Rick. I think here's the point: is that you go back to this idea. It's a very and as I talk to more and more and more cats, it's this idea of demonstrating the ability when you take a solo for a beginning to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and to tell that story cogently, whether it's a groove or whether it's stretched out. And you know what? You told that classic story about that dude that was like, you're like, I want to do this. I want to crank 20 songs in a set. We'll have a ball, just cut the solos down. And it went right out the window. And the guy was just immediately,
right.
It was just like burning away. And it's like, my point is that I'm trying to get peeps, even if inspiring a few peeps, to say, was that the message I was getting the other night from that cat? Was that the message? This is about taste. This is not uniformity. We have enough formulaic stuff going on in our society, and it's hurting us. And it's the idea of saying, I think it's classic that, I'm glad that Vince wasn't offended because, you know what? There's a lot of people that felt the way you did about that Bitches Brew Band. I still have a hard time getting my ear around that. I love the musicians. Oh, more than the music, I love the musicians. So I don't think to me, this is about expressing individual taste. And ultimately, that was my question is crafting when you take a solo, like a drum solo, Rick, did you?
Well, you're never going to hear me do a drum solo. I'm just not good. It's not my thing.
No, it's not your thing.
But it's never been.
I wonder about the idea of when you hear somebody, like, instead of repeating, like with Spinoza, how did he tell a story in a couple of minutes, just with the beginning, the middle, and the end? A lot of cats now, they start at decibel 10, and it never really changes. You don't really know where it starts, where it's in the middle, where it is at the end. How does somebody tell a story with a solo, even though you don't solo?
Well, that was something that I thought Spinoza was unbelievable at. Larry Carlton, unbelievable at it. Joe Carroll, unbelievable at it. Those guys, and I've worked with all of them, and I played live with all of them. I toured with Larry, I toured with David, I've toured with Joe. I played live on gigs with Joe Carroll. Those guys, and there are a lot of other guys like that. There are other guys. They just know how to do it. When the solo starts, it starts at a certain place. It ends at a peak, and you're back into the head of the song. That's with any instrument. Dave Sanborn on saxophone, to me, was just one of the most unbelievable funk sax players I ever played with in my life, who could do exactly the same thing. I remember first time I remember listening to an old Paul Butterfield album right when it first came out, and hearing this song called "In My Own Dream" or "In Your Own Dream." I think it was "In My Own Dream," and Sanborn played on it. And he played this soprano solo on it, and I to this day, I listen to it and I go, Jesus, this was so far ahead of its time and so so simple, it was beyond simple. It was just incredible. And that's something that I can't explain how you do it. When I used to have to solo in bands like Brethren and other bands I was in where they wanted me to solo, I'd say, okay, I'll do a solo, but it's going to last 16 bars or something. That's it. And I invariably would end up standing up. I remember being in front of, 5,000 people and playing some sort of stuff and then just stopping and getting up and grabbing my cymbals and hitting my cymbals, and I would grab them and bend them like a saw, and sort of play something on them. Because that, to me, as lame as it was more interesting than just playing the same notes I heard 15 other guys play. I don't know. I'm not a soloist. I'll tell you, a couple of weeks ago, I went to this Yamaha 50th anniversary thing. They wanted me to go to it in Los Angeles. And they had... I didn't know what it was going to be, and I didn't really know why they wanted me there. And it ended up being a really nice thing because they ended up giving me some sort of a loyalty award for having been with them for so long and all that stuff, and brought me up on stage and talked to me. But there were 3 drum sets set up, and I'm thinking, oh no, this is not my thing. And it was Dave Weckl,
Sure.
Tommy Aldrich, and Larnell Lewis. And it was, I have to say, they played the tracks, they sounded great, and I didn't really know Larnell Lewis before. He can play. This guy's an unbelievable player, and I'm sure you know more about him than I do. I think he plays with Snarky Puppy.
Yeah, I don't know that band, but I know his name from that band. So yeah, he's a talented and very good field player.
Oh my God, could he play field? And he also is very interesting. Like, this is a young guy. He's 33 years old? He's a young guy, and he plays his ass off. I mean, he really plays. He knows the instrument. Now, I know, and he's got insane chops. He played solos and things like that, but so did Weckl. Weckl played groove stuff. He played great, and he played a great solo, a couple of great solos, or 3 or 4 great solos. And Tommy also, who I just, I don't know if you know Tommy Aldrich from Whitesnake, but he's just couldn't be a nicer, sweeter, great, humble human being. And he played they all 3 played differently, and they played great. And I thought, this is something that I can't do. I can't go out there and play those insane million notes a second solos, but they did it, and they did it really well. And Larnell, what was interesting about him, he had an electronic drum on his left that he programmed some stuff into, some sounds, and he played this really amazing sort of, almost felt like African kind of stuff on that, and accompanied it at the same time. It was really, really, really great to hear and watch. So there are guys that are playing interesting, new kind of things. He sounded interesting and different to me. Could play a groove.
No, do you? I know you have to do it for monetary. I mean, there's such a quick turnaround time in Hollywood. How much has jingle making changed from when you started to now? Because you talked before in our last interview about making things feel good on pads and just doing a lot of it yourself. But then you go back, I've done several interviews with the great drummer Mike Clark, and that dude was doing Charlie Brown Christmas specials with Vince Guaraldi like for years. Eventually you'd hear that drumming on local TV when it came on, and it was done over a period of time. Has that time factor? I mean, time is money, but how has jingle making changed since when you first you were doing commercials, in the Brill Building or in New York probably, right? I mean, you were doing jingle work there, and I'm just wondering how it's changed.
Every day.
Yeah, every day.
Well, every day we did them back then. Now it's non-existent for me right now, and I don't hear jingles like I used to back then. I did jingles with Dr. John. I mean, we did Tic Tac commercials where Mac was singing tic-tac, and, whatever, in his style. I mean, that was Dr. John's doing this stuff. The difference now is that there is no jingle business as far as I see. I'm not a jingle guy anymore. I don't remember the last time I played on a commercial. It was a long time ago. At that time, we were doing 10 to 20 a week in New York City.
What about
10 to 20 a week?
What about like sitcom? I know I listened to Fat Albert. I know that was more of like a West Coast contingent, but you were doing sitcoms and things like that, right? Besides jingles.
Yeah. Well, I was writing for sitcoms. I mean, I wrote for Everybody Loves Raymond and Yes Dear and some others, but those are the ones that were the most well known. And there was another one.
I'm sorry. Hold on. You wrote the music. You wrote the music. Or you wrote the comedy or the script.
The music.
Oh, because I thought you were telling me. I thought you got inspired after Cosby came up to you at Berkeley and said, "You're really good at stand-up comedy." Remember?
Yeah.
No, but you were writing the music. You were writing the music.
Cosby said to me,
"Yeah, I know. You told me already."
Man, come here. I want to talk to you. That's pretty funny.
He's like, "You're pretty good."
He was just telling me how much more money he was making than me. Because
I just transcribed it last night. He's like, you know the difference between a drummer, and a comedian? He's like, millions and millions of dollars.
Yeah.
So when you write,
you should look at comedy.
Did when before Raymond and before this time we're in now, when you were doing writing for sitcoms or longer form shows, were you more thoughtful about parts for individual players like, I don't know, Carlton, Arthur Adams, or whoever these cats, as opposed to now where you might say, I just going to do it all myself?
Oh God, yeah. But you know what? I even now, if I have to do something, I don't think that I do anything without calling Waddy Wachtel or Spinoza or somebody like that. The last thing I did, I was on the East Coast, and I called Waddy and I sent him some stuff. I can't play guitar on these things. I mean,
right.
And then even if I really need a real piano part, I'll get a real piano player to play on it because, I'm not going to do everything myself. To demo stuff out and to write stuff, that's a different ball game for me. I'll write that way to try to write things, and I'm always trying to figure out new things, which my latest thing was I watched, this last year, my brother Jerry called me and he said, we're going to do this thing. I got a gig, the Marotta Brothers Band. And we did every Wednesday night at a restaurant on Martha's Vineyard. We did the Marotta Brothers Band. And it was a band he put together of people on Martha's Vineyard. And he and I played 2 drums and he got me to sing some stuff and things like that. So it started out being like me not wanting to do it at all, and it turned out to be really, really a lot of fun. Band was really good, and we turned the place out. It was packed every week after we started. But this woman gave us Wednesday nights to own the restaurant because she knew me, and she said, "Yeah, you guys can have Wednesday nights because no one shows up on Wednesday." So it was, and the next thing you know, that was the night they made the most money at this place every week. But I'm inspired by that. It's like I watched the Emmys the other night and I saw this In Memoriam, and Chris Jackson, who's an actor out of New York, sang a Stevie Wonder song called As or Always. And I loved it. I was so inspired by it that I decided I want to try to do that because my brother has me singing. I said, I want to try to come up with an arrangement for that for the Marotta Brothers. So I was working on the arrangement, and I sat down and I got the changes off. You can go online and get the chord changes for it, and it's so simple and it's so incredibly difficult. And I realized this is what makes sense to me musically. So I called Spinoza and I said, "Man, I got to talk to you about this." And I was telling him the same thing I'm telling you, and I said, "Dave, I'm trying to play these piano parts, and the way Stevie Wonder has these things, how did he come up with this?" Because I always listened to Superstition and those songs, those funky knuckle Stevie Wonder things over the years that are fantastic, and I play them, but I never really listened to the lyrics, and I didn't care that much about the melodies. I cared about the feel and the funk and how it was, the way it played live. And I said, but now when I'm doing this, it's kind of like a ballad, and I'm trying to make it really nice and with this funky idea of this kind of arrangement that I have in my head. And he said to me, well, I said, how did Stevie Wonder come up with this stuff? And he said, well, he's a genius and you're not.
That's almost as good. That's honestly, I still think that your one-liner to Keltner at LAX about it might be better than that. Yeah, but it's me. Yeah, but it's me.
Yeah.
But can you just Tropea? I don't have the sound pulled up, but he talked his first album. He talked about you and Gad playing double drums. When you play with your brother, you're singing, and are you keeping time? What kind of roles do you and Jerry play so you offset each other? What kind of inflections are you adding? Obviously, you're not taking drum solos. You've already said that.
No, we sometimes play these drum solo grooves together, like on brushes or on plastics. That really sounded great in the middle of some groove. We did this song called it was a Shotgun Down the Avenue by Sean Colvin that I think I had played on or something, and this girl singer that's in our band, Joanne Cassidy, we like to do covers of obscure songs, and she said, Rick, I was looking and I saw that you played on the song, let's do it live. And Jerry and I do it, and it's just brushes. It's just a running brush feel, kind of feel. And so Jerry and I do it together, but we end up doing kind of a solo on it. But it's not a drum solo, it's just a groove solo, and it's really feels amazing, and the way it is sometimes I'll just play just and Jerry will play. I'll look over and we're sort of sitting close to each other. Sometimes I'm playing and I get into it and I look and it feels amazing, and I look up and he's playing. If I'm playing snare, he's only playing mostly stuff on the tom-tom and reaching over with his right hand and hitting my closed hi-hat, or my hi-hat will be open and closing, but I won't be playing it. I'll be running on just a snare drum. We complement each other very well, it seems. It's not much different when Steve Gadd and I started playing together. I was trying to explain to Jerry, because when Jerry and I first did the gig, the first night, it was like, this playing drums together is really hard. I said, it's not that hard. I said, it's just, you just got to listen and all that kind of stuff. And then we switched sides. So he plays on the left side and I play on the right side now. And that changed it, because I could see him, he could see me, and it started to change the way we played together, and it sounded better, and it sounds really great. Steve and I, on those Tropea records, John, I remember, let us do that because he couldn't. I think that the reason it happened was John just didn't want to say. He didn't want to do his record with just Steve or with just me at that time. He wanted Steve, he wanted me, so he figured, fuck it, I'm just going to hire both of them. And Steve and I love playing together. We played together before, so we always enjoy the opportunity of playing together. We still do occasionally. So, yeah, but I think.
When was the first time? When was the first time that you go? And Tropea says he has the raw cuts of that session, his self-titled album, and because it got really compressed on the record, and you can hear you guys out of different channels. But he said he goes, I got to release the raw recordings of that session because they were insane with you and Gad. But just the subtle idea of you and your brother. How was that the first time you'd ever played double drums together in a live setting? You and your brother?
No. I don't think he remembers, but we had done a couple of things when I did Groove All Stars. You know the Groove All Stars thing, and
sure.
Then Jerry has a band that was the Yamaha thing, and then we would I think a couple of times Jerry and I did a song together. But a couple of years ago, Jerry put this band together with some buddies of his in Woodstock and in Hudson, New York, and it's called Reelin' in the Years, and it's a Steely Dan tribute band, and Jerry had me come and play double drums with him on that Steely Dan show. And, you know, Jerry's more of a stickler than I am. I mean, he's like analyzes everything that everybody's doing all the time. I'm just like playing and just having a good time.
Yeah.
And I just had to say to him at a certain point, I just said, just relax. You know, we're going to play. It'll sound great. And it sounded great, you know. But that was when we did the gig, the Marotta Brothers gig. It was even better. I mean, we really, you know, there were some songs that we did that we didn't work out parts. We just knew once we started playing, if I played a certain thing, he would hear it or see it, and he would compliment it. And if he played a certain thing, I would hear it or see it, and I would compliment it. So it's different. Sometimes playing with two drummers is a nightmare. You have to really it's a humbling experience. You can't try to overpower the next guy. Like I said with Steve Gadd and I, the last time we did one of the times we did the Groove All-Stars gig, we were going out to play a tune together. And he said, and I knew what was coming. He said, let's try not to get too crazy with it. I said, of course.
Yeah.
He said, I'm going to play. He had brushes. It was like two brushes in each hand. I said, I'm going to play with one brush in each hand. And he said, I'm going to play with one brush. And we got up on stage, and we had this big band behind us. We had horn section, rhythm section, a couple of guitar players. And the next thing you know, he and I are playing so quietly, I didn't even know if he was going to play a note. And we're hysterical. We're laughing because we're just trying to outdo the other guy by playing less than the other guy and quieter than the other guy.
I love it. I love it. Oh,
yeah.
I wish there were some. I hope there were younger
people.
peeps there.
Idea.
That's awesome.
I think that's just goes to show you the way, you know, Steve's out playing now with, he actually, the other night we talked, and he was out playing with Chick Corea band. You know, it's Chick Corea and Steve Gadd now. It's double bill. And I said, man, I don't know how you could, I said, you know, I was doing the stuff with Jerry, and I was doing some playing here and there and doing some other things. I said, man, it's tiring, it's grueling. He goes, tell me about it. I said, you're still out there. You're kicking you're playing Leprechaun. You're playing stuff off of Night Sprite. You're playing this and that. And he still plays the shit out of it. I mean, well,
I mean, the funny thing is that before they corralled, Lenny White was in the band Azteca in San Francisco, and before they could, I guess Airto and Flora had some drug problems. They're going to have to go to jail or something. So the little Stanley Clark told me that back in 73, 74, Steve Gadd was the next drummer in Return to Forever for a minute before they got Lenny to come over. So that guy's been doing it for. But I think it's being able to play rhythmically and keep the groove and not overpower. And if there's one thing that I'm trying to do with my show, it's that understanding that you got from Mac and you got from your parents and that you got from your brother, that no one is above the music. Nobody. That, you know, once the ego supersedes the music, that's when it becomes a one-man show. And that's when I tune out. And that's the one thing I'm concerned about now, is that companies don't get credits. I mean, on Spotify, you're going to type in a genre of music. But you brought up Bernard Purdy before with the ska and the Caribbean. You don't Montego Joe, those albums on Prestige, that's Bernard Purdy playing drums. But you don't know today when you're listening to Afro-Cuban music, you don't know who's playing. So the accompanists have gone by the wayside. And when you look at individual sound, that's also an issue. And it's obvious also the lack of live venues. So there's just these sort of things that you can't do anything about it per se because it's the time we're living through, but you can promote the ideals of what you guys and how you guys made music. And that to me is one of the main reasons I do my show. So, yeah, man, I mean, do you talk to the, I was just curious, do you still talk to Stu Woods and the original Power Trio?
No, I don't see. I reached out to Stu about a year ago. I hadn't heard back from him. No, I don't really have much touch with them. We haven't seen them. We haven't seen each other on gigs or anything. I don't know what they're doing very much these days. I mean, Tommy Cosgrove, I think, is playing around in Westchester I think he's doing some really good stuff. He's a very talented guy. I don't know what Stu's doing. Probably playing around doing the same kind of thing. You know, it's a different business than it was back then. Yeah. So I'm just hoping everybody's doing okay and can pay their mortgages, because musicians are not, the world has completely changed, Jake. I mean, they don't have there are very few guys that are really good musicians that are making more than a stipend to live.
Right.
I mean, guys are, the gigs that Jerry and I were doing on the Vineyard nobody's making any money. We were just enjoying ourselves. But that's the way the musician psyche is. That's the way we go out there. And one of the reasons musicians made so little money is because they put very little value on the fact that they're having so much fun. You know, it wasn't really work. When it turned out to be work, guys realized it was work. I realized it was, when I was making no money, I was happy as a pig in shit. When I was out on the road making a shitload of money.
Yeah, right. You're miserable.
When I was out making a load of money playing music that I wasn't totally into, or that there was other reasons, that was travel or whatever it was work. It wasn't even the music. The music could be great. The guys in the band could be great. I was always friends with all the guys in the bands I was in. It was to travel, and there's some, you know, when I talk to Gad, I say, how do you do it? And he, you know, there are guys I know that can really live that lifestyle. My brother Jerry, I don't know how he drives all over the place to play gigs. He'll do 2 gigs in a day. and you know, people are making great musicians. Some of them are making peanuts, not guys like Gad and other guys that have gotten a foothold, JR and people like that have gotten a foothold in certain areas. Keith Carlock, Steve Jordan, they've really carved a niche for themselves out on the road and are doing really well on really big gigs. That's really great. But the things that go along with it that aren't that great are hotels every night, bus or plane every night, every day. You know, it's different venue, different city, never home. I'm too lazy for that stuff. And it became work. Well, now there are a lot of guys playing that are a lot of great musicians that can't pay their rent, can't pay their mortgages.
Mm-hmm.
And what I feel really bad about is the fact that there was never a real that the business of music wasn't made for the musician. Business of music was made for the executive and for the suits that know business. And no one really taught us as kids that you have to have a head on your shoulders and protect yourself for the future. And that's what I think is very important for a lot of musicians to know nowadays, is that, yeah, it is great. It's fun to play. It's really an amazing spiritual experience to play in a great band and play great groove stuff and have that feel and get all the chicks after the gig is over and make your money and, you know, be adored. But that stuff goes by so fast.
Wow.
It's
I love
gone
it. I
in the
love
blink
it.
of an eye.
I mean, okay, before I let you go, because we just another 85 minutes in the book with Marotta. Do you have any gigs coming up in this fall, winter in California? What is the? I just would love to come see you.
No, I'm going back to the East Coast. But Jerry and I were talking about doing the Marotta Brothers. There are a couple of things on the East Coast that we were talking about, and a couple of things on the West Coast, but nothing is solidified yet. Kind of been very busy doing other things.
Sure. No, I just want to. You know what it is? The next step is to come in person and actually see you play. So I would love to. And also, if you're on Martha's Vineyard, I mean, Charlie Neville's in Huntington, Massachusetts. You better call his ass out there to play. I mean, you better get out.
God, Dad, I didn't know that he was.
Well, no, I'm just saying, I mean, this is why I am all about connecting people using digital technology. I'm connecting humanity through the technology. All right, so you got to do that next time. But I mean, really, let's just stay in touch. And if some gigs do become solidified, especially on the West Coast, you think maybe California potentially, or it'd be like.
There might be. I don't know that we could pull it off. It's getting late, and I'm waiting to find out. Actually, next week, waiting to find out about some things that were in the works. But I don't really know. We haven't really been pursuing anything right now. We're thinking about something going on next year. We're trying. That's the Marotta Brothers thing. The other things that I've been doing are up and they just come and go. Mostly little record dates and little things like that.
Right. No, I mean, listen, let's just stay in touch. But if something crops up, and I also would love to interview Jerry, so if you can put me in touch with him, I'd love that. But sure. I'd love to come see you play next time, Rick. And thank you so much, man, for cranking it out. I don't think you said anything that would alienate anybody today, personally.
Well, my pleasure. I really hope I don't get a bunch of calls telling me what the fuck were you talking about. Man, like crazy.
No, dude, no. It's like
just my opinion.
Hey, man,
my humble opinion.
And you know what? We still live in a free country where opinion is needed. And when people hear that stuff, they can say, "Oh, okay, I'm not crazy either." Everyone says they like that stuff, but actually, I've always felt that way too. So I don't know, man. I don't lose any sleep over it. But I'll be transcribing stories on this one too later on. I'll get you a copy of this later on.
Okay.
All right.
I'll talk to you, Jake.
All right,
care.
Rick.
Good
Take
luck.
care, man. Peace.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Another one of the books with Rick Marotta. We'll be back tomorrow with David Lindley Part 2 and Dave Bargeron. Until then, peace.